Dorothy Oliver was a young parent of the Lincoln School District in New Rochelle, New York in 1959.
And I was just excited about her being there and just being the mother, and just couldn't wait till the first PTA meeting so I could go to her kindergarten school. And the thought was I was going to do all I could do to make sure she didn't go through what I went through.
She had already taught Valerie to read and had the best school outfits picked out for her little girl. Her Valerie was going to have everything she didn't.
Would you like a biscuit, but not one of the hard ones? I give you the first set.
But changes in education were brewing. Separate but equal schooling was not working for America. Whether they were called colored, Negro, or immigrant, these parents' eyes were open since the 1954 United States Supreme Court decision of Brown versus Board of Education. Negro parents of Arkansas, Alabama, and Virginia formulated plans for protests. The High Court of the land had forged a covenant with them. A generation of mothers and fathers were lit with passion for their children's education. In the North, New York's Harlem mothers were on fire. They were boycotting. They were demanding access to white schools with better supplies and facilities. They were getting results. This empowerment was spreading. Did Dorothy know when she began to attend her first Lincoln School PTA meetings, she would be thrust into the middle of the debate about integrated schools? A debate that would land her home city of New Rochelle on the front page of newspapers and TV broadcasts. A debate that divided the city for 5 years. Then they tore down Lincoln School, and the story disappeared.
The Lincoln Elementary School that used to stand right here has been leveled now, its foundations plowed under so that grass can grow. And the wounds inflicted by that segregation court case have healed over in the first school decision in the North that pleased the Negroes and satisfied the whites.
As a teacher, I have always been fascinated by the Ruby Bridges story. Ruby walked into the William Frantz School in Louisiana on November 14, 1960, with federal marshals around her and protesters across the street. She was tiny. She was 6. Famous New Rochelle resident Norman Rockwell painted Ruby Bridges. We were taught about that in elementary school, and the story stayed with me all of my life. We were not taught that in 1960, 2 months before Ruby's famous walk, Leslie Taylor, Rosalind Williams, and 10 other African-American children walked with their parents into my school, Roosevelt School in New Rochelle, New York, one of the most affluent suburbs of New York City, and they were turned away. They were sent back to the segregated all-black Lincoln School downtown. They tried to enter several majority-white schools in my city that week. It took another year to get them into those schools, and another year to get state busing put into place. By the time I was enrolled in 1964, my elementary school was integrated. It had always been diverse, I thought. I was not aware that that integration was the result of protests, boycotts, arrests, and a court case. Integration in New Rochelle was orchestrated into being by determined moms and dads with a brilliant lawyer from the NAACP. I was just a half-Irish, Catholic, half-Episcopalian kid, white. My childhood friends were mostly not what I was. I was unaware why. I was blind. I was 4 years old.
I honestly wasn't aware of the case until I was an adult.
I had no knowledge of the political scenario of the Lincoln School.
I heard the name, but I don't recall that at all. I mean, I don't think I knew there was or wasn't a school.
While it was happening, we were unaware of it, I think, as kids. I was not aware of it at all.
We didn't know. Nobody, it wasn't like anybody sat and explained, this is what's happening.
The simple way to say that is that if you're used to a certain way, you don't think of any other way.
So I knew absolutely nothing about Lincoln School, especially it was interesting now knowing about it. I see what happened at Davis. So at Davis, there was a bus that showed up. Most of my friends and I all walked to school, but there was one random bus that showed up. I had no clue that was the bus that came from the Lincoln district.
My friends were blonde, blue-eyed,
we had
black,
a mixture.
white. It didn't make a difference. We learned to judge people by the character.
Part of the fabric of my childhood was that I grew up in a diverse city that cared about integration.
The Lincoln School District remains the same, almost solid Negro. The boundaries of the district are the same as they were before the Lincoln School was torn down. It used to be a neighborhood school. 94% of its students were Negro. But now, these same children go to other elementary schools in New Rochelle. The instrument of integration here is the prosaic school bus. In many another city in the north, it is the vehicle the whites fear will take their children to some distant school to be with Negroes the parents don't much want their children with in the first place. But in New Rochelle, it's been the Negroes' transport to peaceful integration in the schools.
So many important figures, national figures, who've lived in New Rochelle. You have famous artists like Norman Rockwell lived here.
Activists of the day, Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee and Whitney Young, all had come here. And then the families at Lincoln School sued the Board of Education over segregation.
How did they end up in court with their school board accused of racism? How did one small school miss the opportunities? How did one neighborhood get left behind in the growing economy of post-World War II America?
It's fascinating as it is heartbreaking. And you know, we always sing our praises about how diverse we are and the dozens of flags that fly inside our high school representing the different nationalities of the students. And we're always talking about our great diversity. We have to really, really look hard at those times in our history that we weren't celebrating the diversity. We weren't this, I've often said it wasn't always all rosy. And you have to look at that to make sure it doesn't keep repeating itself.
De jure segregation refers to the legal separation of groups in society. In the southern states of America, segregation was codified by laws and Jim Crow policies that could be attacked in court. The communities roiled with turmoil over court-ordered desegregation of their schools.
Yes, I knew about the lynchings. Yes, I'd read about them. And when they bombed that church, with those 4 little girls in there, one of them close to my age at that time, I'm like, they're not human. So why am I trying?
Schools were closed, were chained up and shuttered. Whites took flight. Neighborhoods changed.
4 years after the courts ordered New Orleans to integrate its schools and accepted the school board grade-a-year plan, 42 of the 88 elementary schools in this parish are still all Negro schools. Like this one, McDonough 19, which 4 years ago was all white. White students are still segregated in 21 other elementary schools.
In the north, I think you've had de facto segregation, which in some areas is bad or even more extreme than in the south. And there, I think everybody concentrated on what was happening in Birmingham, Alabama, and didn't look at what needed to be done in our own home.
Well, of course, I don't feel that this hit the North, except that it exploded. It was always there. Our records show in the NAACP that we were working on school problems in the North back in the 1920s.
There was no specific law that had separated the children of Lincoln School by race.
Lincoln School was experiencing changes starting in around the 1930s. Because the community was changing. Originally, the Lincoln Avenue corridor was a very diverse community with Italian, Irish and black families living side by side. After the war, they built these housing projects. So soldiers coming home from the war, this was an economical way for them to house their families, with the knowledge that, that at some point they were going to save enough money to buy a house. So what happened is many of the white people, the white families, were able to do just that. But because of discrimination, the black families became trapped in these housing developments. Some of them moved out, but not the kind of turnover that was expected. And it was basically due to, black people couldn't get loans from banks. The neighborhoods were redlined, meaning that, real estate agents would only show, black people homes in certain areas that were designated as black neighborhoods.
This is de facto segregation, and it is insidious and simple as a city clerk rejecting a form or application, or a school moving a line or two on a map that the general public never sees, or a bookmobile changing its books because it's taking books to that neighborhood, the Lincoln School neighborhood. Small moments, tiny changes in policy designed to keep a neighborhood down, and yet claiming it came to be that way naturally.
People today have a lot of difficulty trying to win de facto segregation cases, to win gerrymandering cases. Those things are hard to prove. And so the fact that they went full throttle, that they found Paul Zuber, who was an incredible attorney for them.
The Supreme Court decision in Brown had empowered parents to speed up the timeline of integration for their children. Mothers in Harlem, New York City rose up in 1958. May Mallory and the Little Rock Nine of Harlem also pulled their children out of school. They flipped the political picture from bad parenting being the problem to failing schools. In the fall of 1959, the Harlem parents renewed their boycott, making national news. At the same time, 30 minutes north in New Rochelle, parents of Lincoln School prepared their attack.
And you have to remember that while they are doing this, they are sacrificing. They're sacrificing their just kind of normal lives, right? They're trying to get their kids into schools that are much further away from where they currently are. They're going to upend their kids. Their kids have friends. I could see my daughter one day being, arguing about moving because her best friend is in her class. And we don't think of those small little stories, but those things matter to a family. And they fought through that.
And they were saying, no, they're not sending us to school. They're not sending us to the school. The school was falling down. We had old books, and we wasn't learning properly. So with that, they said, well, you're going to jail. And my parents was like, okay.
Mrs. Taylor and her group needed to take action. You'll hear from teachers who taught at Lincoln School saying they taught children just as any other, but we know what the statistics were, and we know what the grade averages were. So they had to take action, I feel, and it was huge, and they were very brave to do this.
And see where that building is, that was an open street.
Right where that building was?
Yes.
Okay.
And it went all the way out to the corner here where you now see.
We're walking through the space where the building was right now.
Yes. Yeah. We're walking through the building.
Yeah.
Naturally, it starts with your education. There's no getting around that. And if your education is below par, if you aren't getting, what the rich are getting, or whites are getting, people of privilege are getting, yes, you're going to suffer. There's no getting around that. But what gets me is so systemic. It's in every part of fabric of our lives. It's in your education.
My grandma and your grandma were sitting by.